Well, hello, our fellow friends, our fellow neighbors, and our fellow shining stars. Our next trolley stop is here, and our next trolley stop is now. Welcome back to another all-new episode of the PR from the Heart Children's Book Spotlight Series. To be precise, we have reached episode number 149. That is the 149th trolley stop here at the Children's Book Spotlight Series at PR from the Heart. My name is John Masiulionis, the manager here at PR from the Heart. Thank you for spending some time with us wherever you are and wherever you may be here in our neighborhood. We are just a few days shy of the beginning of the summer. So raise your hand once again if you are excited for the start of summer, which is literally just around the corner. And raise your hand as well if you are excited about the start of the summer reading season. I know that's one of my favorite times of the year, and that's one of the favorite times of the year for our little ones all across the country and all around the world. One of the most beautiful blessings that we have as parents and caregivers and grandparents and custodians of little ones is when we take the time to read to them, especially at bedtime. That is something that can create a very strong bonding experience, whether it be between mother and daughter, or mother and son, or father and son, especially with Father's Day just around the corner. And I know that here at PR from the Heart, we get a lot of questions from moms and dads and grandparents. John, what is the perfect bedtime book so that I can read to my son, that I can read to my daughter? And there's so many books out there, and they all serve their purpose. One of the things, if you go back generations, because reading is something that really has lasted for such a long period of time in our history. We go back to folk tales. Folk tales are something that has been shared for generations. And we're going to be learning here this week on the Children's Book Spotlight Series of the work of Thornton W. Burgess, but not only talk about his work, but we're going to be sharing an updated version of his work, a revised, updated, and retold version of his work. So if you are a lover of Beatrix Potter with your little ones, Bramley Hedge, The Animals of Farthing Wood, or one of my favorites growing up, The Wind in the Willows, then this episode of the Children's Book Spotlight Series is for you and for your little one. Children will be delighting in the brand new book that we are sharing here on this week's edition of the Children's Book Spotlight Series. You can head on over to the official website of our featured guest here on the program this week, MuzMurray.com. You can head on over to Amazon.com. If that is your preferred online vehicle of your choosing, and you can leave a 5-star review for Old Mother West Wind Tales. That is again now available. You can also leave a 5-star review, as that is one of the many ways that you can pledge your support for Muz and let him know that he is doing wonderful and much needed work for children, parents, families, educators, those who love great bedtime stories, those who love folk tales, everything else in between. So we travel. The trolley's going to be traveling a little bit further here this week on the program, from San Diego all the way around the world to Portugal, as we connect here with our featured guest here on episode number 149 of the Children's Book Spotlight Series, Muz Murray. And you may remember, Muz is a member of the PR from the Heart family. He actually wrote a beautiful book last year called You Are the Light, Secrets, the Universe, and now he is indeed doing wonderful and much needed work for children. So Muz, it's great to welcome you back as a member of the PR from the Heart family, and it's great to have you as a featured guest here on the Children's Book Spotlight Series. Thank you for spending some time with us. How are things with you this week?
Thank you, John. It's always a pleasure to share things with you.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. And before we officially begin our conversation, if this episode already, and if these messages that we are talking about, if you're saying, Muz, John, I love folk tales, or I love folk tales and fairy tales, or yes, hooray, I have a brand new bedtime story that I can share with my little ones. we encourage you, if you haven't had the opportunities to do so, to subscribe to PR from the Heart's official YouTube channel and to share this very special trolley stop. That is episode number 149 of the Children's Book Spotlight series. Muz, I'm very excited to talk about your book because this isn't the traditional children's book. Normally when we have a lot of books that we talk about on the Children's Book Spotlight series, they're the traditional children's picture books. But before we talk about your book, there's always an origin story. And for some people growing up, it's a matter of there is a specific moment in time where they know, okay, I'm going to be a children's author, or here is how things started with my work for the children. You really deeply care about little ones and bring light and love and joy into their hearts, especially through these adorable characters like Johnny Chuck and Jimmy Skunk and Reddy Fox, and we'll be talking about all of them and all of their friends as well too. But your origin story for our listeners and viewers, our friends and neighbors, and of course our fellow shining stars who are learning about you for the first time here this week on the Children's Book Spotlight series. Could you share with us where it really all began for you and when you knew that your work was here for the children, especially with regards to becoming a children's author?
Well, I've always wanted to give pleasure to children who read by offering them the best quality work that I'm able to write and illustrate. It was hardly a decision I had to make because I was an avid reader of folk tales and children's books since I first learned to read, and they've colored my imagination, and I've lived in their atmosphere for all of my life. I've always written stories for children since I was 8 years old. So aside from my spiritual books, for light relief, it was only natural that I should write something in the same genre.
And I'm really glad that you followed your heart, because I think that, you know, what happens with many people, it's very easy when we have a vision that's in our mind's eye or in our heart, and we can wonder, do I have the skills? Do I have the gifts? Do I have the talents? Why me? There's so many children's authors. There's so many children's books. And again, as we communicate and we talk more during this week's episode of the Children's Book Spotlight series, our listeners and viewers will truly be learning how this book, what it is that you're sharing with the children with Old Mother West Wind Tales is really something very unique and something very special that can be passed down from generation to generation. The world of folk tales, it's something that, again, it is lasted, as I had alluded beforehand and mentioned, it's something that's been around for generations. When someone decides to write a children's book, there's obviously that moment, that aha, where it's a matter of, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. So you had different options. You could have written a book about love and compassion. You could have written just a simple, fun, playful book, but you decided to incorporate folk tales and to make this a little bit more of a longer style book. So I'm curious to learn, why folk tales? Why did you want to make that the focus of this particular book?
Well, it's not so much folk tales as such, but animal adventures gave me the capacity to add other elements about nature and the lives of the animals that are in the stories. So it was a double whammy, if you like, to work with that kind of structure.
And the structure, you know, one of the things that I really enjoy about your book that I was communicating with you in the PR from the Heart Green Room is how you can take the time and you can read one chapter and you can just reflect on it. And you can say, wow, like this was so fun. And there was this character and this character. But I know that when I was reading your book, there was a part of me that's like, but I want to go on to the next chapter. So parents and grandparents and caregivers of little ones, they can really, based on the little one's enthusiasm and excitement, You can take the time to read one chapter at a time, or you can knock out the whole book in one sitting. But just remember that if you do that, that a little bit more time is needed in the process. Again, and there's just so many characters that we're going to be talking about as well, too, here in episode number 149 of the Children's Book Spotlight series. Now, I had mentioned the name Thornton W. Burgess. Now,
Yes.
People might be, sometimes people are better with names than faces. Sometimes people may be better with faces than names. Sometimes people might be like, I've heard of that name before, but I'm not sure where that came from. For those who are familiar with Thornton W. Burgess's work, but who are also not familiar, especially those who are not familiar with Thornton W. Burgess's work, could you share with us a little bit more about the role that he played and the work that he was cultivating and developing and then sharing with children, parents, and families around the world when he was alive?
Yeah, well, Thornton Waldo Burgess was an American nature lover and a conservationist of wildlife. He was born in Massachusetts in 1874, and he became a prolific writer of children's books about animals. He had a newspaper series that he worked on for about 50 years, and he wrote about 170 books in his lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah, he was so prolific, and his very first book, written in 1910, was called Old Mother West Wind, which became a children's classic of its time. And this was the first book that took my fancy at 6 years old when I pulled it off the shelf in the children's library at my school. It was quirky and unusual, and it captured my imagination sufficiently to remember it many years later.
So Muz, we're sharing so much wonderful information, and there's so much good that has come through the creation of this book. We have the human element. Whenever we do something new, when we follow our heart's desires and we do what it is that we came here to do, it can bring up a lot of feelings, anxiety, frustration, and when we're experiencing any sort of stress, we can have challenges, difficulties, obstacles, problems, stressors, troubles, worries, you name it, and we can experience those. Exactly. So when it comes to putting this book together, from the writing to the publishing to getting the message out there, along the way, what has been some of the primary challenges and difficulties that you've experienced in creating Old Mother West Wind Tales? And what were some of the things that helped you to get through to the other side of those challenges?
Well, firstly, it was a problem of finding a copy of the book itself, because I always remembered the title. And when I became an author myself, I always wondered what it was that appealed to a 6-year-old so that I could write something similar myself. But try as I may, I could never find a copy of this book anywhere. And I tried in charity shops and old bookshops and never found one, and no one that I asked in the UK had ever heard of this book. So it wasn't until a year or so ago, in my 80s, that I thought of typing the name into Google. And lo and behold, I was thrilled to discover that it was an old American children's classic. And with further ferreting about on the internet, I found the original manuscript in the archives of a foundation that preserved old out of copyright books. And being out of copyright, it meant that I was free to republish it, as I really wanted to introduce it to British children who'd never known anything about these stories. But however, on rereading the book again with a more critical adult eye, I found the narrative rather old-fashioned, a bit too moralistic for my taste, and with a rather clunky writing style that made for difficulties in reading aloud. And there were also a number of unexplained gaps in the narrative which made me scratch my adult head. For example, even in the first chapter, it said, the merry little breezes were fond of teasing their friend Johnny Chuck. But who on earth was Johnny Chuck? The story never explains it. But later in the chapter, it said the farmer was always after him with his gun. So I became convinced that he was a rabbit. But it was only after more computer research that I discovered he was in fact a groundhog or a woodchuck. So my feeling was that such omissions needed clarifying throughout the book, and often there was no rhyme or reason for some of the things the animals did. So I decided to add plausible motives wherever I could. And virtually all the stories only had the bare bones of a plot. So I did my best to flesh out the narrative with explanations wherever I could, where there seemed to be a lack. And another unfortunate omission was that there were no girls in the book, because Burgess wrote the book for his son. So there were no females in it at all, except for a couple of mothers in the background. Well, that wouldn't do at all. And that was really annoying to present day mothers who wanted to read the book to their daughters. So I added a few female characters, like the resourceful and heroic little Zoe Otter. And another thing that troubled me was, would the Americans who grew up with these stories resent me for the temerity of tampering with their beloved tales? But as I pressed on through the book, I found quite a few old-fashioned attitudes that were really off-putting to the readers of today. So I went and checked out the reviews of present-day parents and found them complaining about the writing style of the original book, the lack of females, and how some children are bored by the feeble plots without any action to grab their attention. One reviewer wrote, "What an annoying style of prose," which is a sentiment I found echoed by many others. So, thinking of the poor parents who had to stumble over the ungainly sentences, I began typing out alternative phrases to make the text smoother to read. And the more I read and wrote, a poetical rhythm to the narrative began to spring unbidden to my mind. And I felt the rhythmical prose enliven the text in a lyrical way. And I took this to be an encouraging sign. And I trust that I have redressed all these problems for today's happy readers. And by the reviews that are coming in from delighted parents, it seems that I have done the job.
I feel that you have, Muz, and I give you a lot of credit because, again, with the work that you did, and I'll even use the word the research that you had to do before writing this book, is that you obviously had to go through the original book in its original form and go through and to ensure that it would really resonate with children, especially today, because something at the turn of the century in 1900, or even something that happened, let's say in the 1950s, if there was a book that was written in the 1950s, we've evolved as a culture, we've evolved as a society, and things that were written about then may not appeal to children today, but they also, certain things are not, like, for example, and this is, completely unrelated to the story, but obviously, during like the 1950s in the United States, 1950s, 1960s, there was a lot of racial segregation. and a lot of how whites did not want African Americans to be involved in what it is that they are doing. So there was a story that would kind of come from that sort of a tone from beforehand. It wouldn't hold any weight today. So the fact that you took the dedicated time that you did to be able to ensure that you preserve the energy and the legacy of Thornton's stories, but also
the style and the quirky quality. I kept his type of imagination.
Exactly. And then you also provided your own soul signature with that, your own energetic imprint, which I think is great. Now, we're almost ready to dive into the pages of Old Mother West Wind Tales. We hope that you're enjoying your time here in our neighborhood with us. This is episode number 149 of the PR from the Heart Children's Book Spotlight series. Joining us as our featured guest here on the program this week is Muz Murray. And again, we are now ready to dive into the pages of Old Mother West Wind Tales. You can purchase your copy if you feel guided to do so by heading on over to Muz's official website, muz-murray.com. You can also head on over to amazon.com if that is your preferred online vehicle of your choosing. And when leaving a 5-star review, just know that that is one of the many ways that you can pledge your support for Muz, to let him know that he is doing wonderful and much needed work for children, parents, families, educators, those who love great children's books, and those who love nature as well, too. We're going to be talking about nature and animals and so much more throughout the course of the rest of our trolley stop here this week. Muz, before we dive into some of the chapters within the story, I wanted to introduce some of the characters from the book. If there's so many different characters. I know that you had mentioned Zoe the Otter, who can be found in chapter 13, I believe it is, if I'm not mistaken. And there's just so many lovable, adorable characters. Could you share a couple of the ones that little ones have really enjoyed to this particular point in time? Because what we're going to be doing for our listeners and viewers is sharing some of the illustrations from the book while you're discussing this. So could you introduce us to some of the characters that little ones will be enjoying in Old Mother West Wind Tales?
Yes, well, everybody loves Johnny Chuck, who's a major character in these stories, and Reddy Fox also, because he's rather sly and a bit of a cad, so he brings some mischievous energy to the stories. Also, people are loving the new character, little Zoe Otter, because good, she's female, and she's heroic, and she's full of great ideas. And the new character, Toby Cockles, the terrapin, also people appreciate, and especially P.T. Rabbit, the prankster, who gets into trouble all the time for making pranks to everybody, but in the end he gets his comeuppance and everybody's happy about that.
Those are such adorable characters. One of the things, Muz, that I really also enjoy about your book is that at the beginning of each chapter, there is a visual to accompany the chapter before the chapter actually begins. So, for example, in chapter 13, at the very beginning, you see little Zoe Otter, and you see her friend Betty Beaver. So if I'm a parent, if I'm a grandparent, if I'm reading to the little ones, even before I start, you can already say, this is who, little Zoe Otter is, and this is who Betty Beaver is. So it's already creating a connection. The little ones are able to connect with the characters before they dive into the rest of the story. And I think that's a very, it's very helpful, because you could have easily included the illustrations of the characters 5 or 6 pages in, and the little ones might not necessarily, they would still be able to connect with the character, but there's that visual that's planted in their brain, their mind, their heart right off the bat, which I think is fantastic. Now, again, there are 16 different stories that are within the context and the contents of Old Mother West Wind Tales, ranging from the first chapter, which is Mrs. Redwing's Speckled Eggs, all the way through chapter 16, The Best Thing in the World. I know that, just to mention, one of my favorite chapters was chapter 4, Why Jimmy Skunk Wears Stripes. Now, as many of us know, when we see skunks, first off, the automatic thing that we want to do is, human nature is run away because we don't want to get sprayed by the skunk, right? And we know that skunks are black and white. But when I was reading chapter 4 and I was learning about, you know, this adorable character who wants to be able to, you know, create some a disturbance of sorts, we realized that Jimmy Skunk is a black skunk, but because of, and not to give anything away from the story, but because of what, you know, Jimmy landed up doing, he landed up, you know, his color had to change. So we see how skunks are both black and white, and they're not just black in the process. So it was a little fun anecdote, you know, to kind of see towards the end of the book itself. As we dive into the pages of Old Mother West Wind Tales, could you share maybe one of your favorite chapters in the book, and maybe another chapter in the book, because we don't want to give away the whole kit and caboodle, as we like to say here on the children's series. What is maybe one or two of the chapters that children have really enjoyed quite a bit?
One of the most children relate to the Willful Little Breeze chapter, which I think is chapter 3.
That is correct.
Where the willful little breeze named Swooshy, she doesn't want to stay out. She doesn't want to go to bed, and she wants to stay out later. And her mother goes off and leaves her alone in the field. And after a while, she finds she's very lonely and finds that it is not so much fun all by herself. And when the night comes down, and she gets very frightened, and a lot of children relate to this lonely little merry little breeze.
That is, and just kind of going back to that particular chapter, I can really understand why children would want to enjoy reading that chapter, especially over and over and over again. Continue, Muz, go ahead.
Yeah, well, there's certain aspects in the original writing where Thornton Burgess misses out the drama of the situations. For example, when the Merry Little Breeze rushes over to warn the Bob White bird family that Reddy Fox and Hooty the Owl were coming to gobble them all up, instead of reacting with alarm, the father bird just says, "Oh, thank you, Little Breeze. I think I'll move my family." That kills the moment dead. Mm-hmm. And he misses these moments to dramatize throughout the book.
That's very true. And, you know, one of the things is you're talking about these characters you have thus far between Johnny Chuck and little Zoe Otter and Toby Cockles, the Terrapin. I know that speaking about that, there was one specific chapter I know that you had wanted to talk about, that you had experienced a little bit of difficulty with. It kind of took a little bit more time in terms of the creation and the molding. And that's chapter 15, Toby Cockles and the Acorn Race. Could you share with us a little bit more about that, if you could?
Oh yes, that was my worst nightmare for trying to do something with this chapter, because it was Thornton's version of the Hare and the Tortoise Race.
Correct.
And the chapter was previously called Spotty the Turtle Wins the Race. Well, in that, he's already given the plot away.
Yes.
So there's no point in reading it. And the story was about a race to gather hickory nuts from a distant tree. And the turtle hangs on to the tail of Reddy Fox, which is absurd that a fox wouldn't notice the heavy weight of a turtle hanging on his tail to get to the tree. And when the turtle gets there, he hides the nuts so that he cheats in order to win the race. And when he comes back, he gets applauded by the other animals for his cleverness. Well, I saw that many readers were not happy with teaching children that it's a good thing to cheat.
No.
And so this chapter was so difficult for me to rewrite that I decided to leave it out altogether. Because for a start, there are no hickory nuts in England. Children wouldn't know what they were. Nor are there any turtles. Turtles are seagoing creatures. They don't live in freshwater rivers. So I was completely at a loss to know how to rework the plot. And I gave up for some months, racking my brain to find a way to get around this story. And suddenly I thought of terrapins. Terrapins are little freshwater tortoises, and turtles have flippers like seals, whereas terrapins have 4 legs. And so I decided to make a race with this terrapin.
Mm-hmm.
And I chose, instead of hickory nuts, I thought of acorns. And the only one acorn left on the tree that all the guys who were boasting about how fast they could run, all thinking they would win the race and grab the one acorn and get back, they would win the race. So I had great difficulty of finding reasons why each one of them, Reddy Fox, Billy Brock, Sneasel the Weasel, and all the racers, finding reasons why they did not arrive in time to get the acorn.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, so eventually I was able to rewrite the story, and it's up to the readers to let me know whether they think it works or not.
Well, I appreciate this vulnerable share, Muz, because sometimes when someone reads a book, any kind of book, you can think, oh, this chapter was easy to put together, right? And this,
Yeah.
it sounds like this was a, this particular chapter, it almost feels like it was kind of like a book within the book in terms of putting everything together. Again, you know, doing the homage, the tip of the cap to Thornton W. Burgess, making sure that everything logistically felt right, planting your own soul signature as well, too, because you put a lot of thought and care. This is one of the other things that I want to mention to our listeners and viewers, to our friends and neighbors, and of course, our fellow shining stars, is that you can really tell in life when someone puts care into something. One of my favorite expressions, Muz, is that like when you go to a restaurant and you're served a good meal, I know when a meal is cooked with love. You can literally feel it in the food when you're eating it, right?
Yeah.
You know when something is written from love, and without a shadow of a doubt, Old Mother West Wind tales are indeed written with love. One of the things that I also really enjoy in the book is that the characters, they're not the traditional characters. It was important for you to introduce little ones to more well-known animals of the British countryside. So, so why was it important for you to introduce those characters, to kind of like, you know, bring the British style of writing and the British animals of the British countryside and introduce them to little ones, especially here in the United States? Why was that important to you?
Well, the thing is that a lot of the names of the animals in the American version, the children I'd never heard of in Britain, like Billy Mink and Bob Whitebirds and all that kind of thing. Muskrat, we don't have muskrats in England. And so I changed those to otters, and I I changed them to familiar animals of the British countryside so that children could relate to them very easily. But I think all the same, American children will still love the characters, even though they are English animals.
I agree, and again, I think this is why, if I put, on the hat of a parent, even though I'm not a parent just yet, or if I put the hat on of being a grandparent, it's important to introduce different styles of writing to our little ones, different characters, so that they're not just reading the same book every day. And again, the fact that there are 16 different stories within Old Mother West Wind Tales, this is something that is really important for little ones, especially when it comes to bedtime stories. We're going to talk about that momentarily.
Yes, I didn't want them to be cardboard characters. I wanted to give them life and more energy and attitudes that capture the children's interest.
Agreed, and you did a wonderful job with that. One of the other things that I wanted to create a positive awareness to is the fact that at the end of each chapter, you talk about the animal or one of the animals from the chapter. So little ones are able to learn about nature. You call them nature stories. So little ones, for example, at the end of chapter 1, learn about groundhogs. And at the end of chapter 2, little ones learn more about frogs. So like, for example, there's a picture of a frog, and it's not just a little one paragraph description of here's a frog and here's what they are and here's what they do. It's a pretty in-depth version of what a frog is, what a groundhog is. Talk to us a little bit more about that and really the significance of making that a focal point where it's not just the book, it's a way to be able to kind of, conclude each chapter, but create more information for the little ones so that they can learn more about their favorite animals that are in nature.
Yes, well, I wanted to be a naturalist at one time when I was growing up. I studied everything about animals, birds, and plants and what have you. So the children, I noticed that as an educator, I taught in some schools, and children have inquiring minds. When they read a story, they want some background information. They really want to know, well, how does this animal live? Where does it live? What do they eat? What are their enemies? All this kind of thing. So I picked out the best fun facts that I could remember and find and write it in a very attractive way so that it's fun to learn things. Like when I talk about quails, saying the quails are granivores, that doesn't mean they eat grannies. It means they eat grains, that sort of thing. So it keeps the children's interest while they're learning about the animals and birds.
And for example, Muz, and thank you for sharing that, at the very end of chapter 15, you talked about terrapins just a short time ago. And at the end of chapter, I believe it's chapter 14, little ones learn about trout and pike, which are two of the fish that you see when you go, fishing with your father and son, you go fishing. So little ones know about dogs and cats and the traditional kinds of, whether it be household pets or even, animals in nature. You might know about like the zebra when you go to the zoo. But again, you share more about animals that little ones may have heard of or have had some sort of an awareness of, but they really haven't been introduced to fully. And you do a great job with that. We're beginning to wind down our time with our featured guest here on episode number 149 of the PR from the Heart Children's Book Spotlight Series. Children's author Muz Murray is very kind to join us here this week on the program from Portugal. We're enjoying his brand new children's book, which is oh so much more than a children's book, Old Mother West Wind Tales. You can head on over to Muz's official website, muz-murray.com. You can also head on over to amazon.com if that's your preferred online vehicle of your choosing. You can leave a 5-star review if you feel guided to do so, as by leaving a 5-star review. That is one of the many ways that you can pledge your support for Muz, to remind him that he is doing much needed and wonderful work for children, parents, families, educators, those who love great children's books, those who love animals and nature, those who love folk tales, those who were big fans of Thornton W. Burgess, all of that, and then some. The importance of reading to our children before bed. That's one of the last things that I wanted to cover. I really feel it is something that has successfully passed through the annals of time. We've been through so much alone over the course of the past several years, Muz, especially during COVID and the pandemic. And I've said this to friends and colleagues and clients of mine, parents who I know, that one of the silver linings during COVID is that families had the opportunities to grow closer together. And as the result of the pandemic, one of the things is that children were able to read more. And now, yes, things are starting to open up around the world. We're starting to be, thankfully, on the other side of the pandemic. But it's important for us to be able to continue to encourage the love of reading in our little ones. What do you feel is it about bedtime stories and reading to your little ones at bedtime? Why do you believe that that is one of the most beautiful things that we can do? And how does reading to children, especially at bedtime, how do you believe that it helps them in terms of their learning, their development, and just realistically speaking, help them to enjoy childhood as much as possible?
Well, for a start, it makes them feel accepted and loved by having mother or father or grandma read to them, and they feel it's like being cuddled with the stories. And that's why I wrote this lyrical style, so that it'd be a joy for parents to want to read the stories to the children, and it will change, affect their imaginations for their whole lives, and the feeling of being nurtured, and their bonding with their parents or grandparents. To me, this is the most important things. I always encourage people to actually read to children, because it makes such a difference to their lives and their imagination.
That's so true. And I feel that this is why this particular book, your book, Old Mother West Wind Tales, with 16 different chapters, you can literally spend almost, literally, and then some, a little bit more than a half of 1 month. And you can read this book, your book, to little ones over a prolonged span of time. And the stories, I can only imagine just, some of the continuous feedback that you're receiving, how little ones will want to go back to the beginning. How once you're complete with chapter 16, the best thing in the world, you can say, Mom, Dad, Grandma, Grandpa, let's go back and read Mrs. Redwing's Speckled Egg. So maybe there is a favorite section in the book, a favorite chapter that can be a go-to for little ones, so that, yes, they're able to still read other books and enjoy some picture books and things of that nature. But one of the other things that I wanted to mention about your book that I really enjoy is that, since the book has a little bit more substance and depth, and, little ones who are maybe, let's say, 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, they might not be able to grasp the full concept of the book yet. You can still take the time, parents and grandparents, they can take the time to read with the little ones. Now, obviously, depending upon someone's age and how much they connect with the characters, you probably already have had 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds gravitate to the book. But this really, depending upon where a child is in terms of their growth and their development, there are so many different ways in which the book is and can be enjoyed, is what I'm trying to convey.
Yeah, well, I'm already getting parents reading it to bright 3-year-olds and saying they followed the plot perfectly. So, and children right up to 12 are totally intrigued by the stories. So from 3 years onwards, all the kids go for the book, and I've read it to 3-year-olds and 8-year-olds and 10-year-old, and they all get off on it.
That is, and one of the other points that I wanted to mention as well too is that besides the beautiful color that you see on the front and on the back, this book truly has an old school feel to it. Because if you remember before, just like when color television came into existence, I think it was around like maybe the late 1940s, early 1950s, everything back in the day was black and white. And it had that's how things were. It was the old school nature. So, obviously this is a way where you can kind of, connect the old school with the new school, so to speak, in terms of where kids are today, so to speak, because I feel that, being able to have these gentle rhyming bed tales, have these be available for kids, it can just allow them to see what it was like to be a child, like when you were a child growing up.
Yeah, well, I specifically decided I wanted to create a book that looked like the kind of books that I read when I was 4 or 5 years old, with large print and the same style of print, to give that feeling that I loved as a child, and I would think children would love also that style, because it's easy to read with this big print.
That's true. That is something that will also, just as a reminder, when you enjoy Old Mother West Wind tales, you're not going to have to use a magnifying glass in order to read the print. The little ones will be able to see, wow, this is big print. And I know, I'll be honest with you, Muz, when I started reading the book and I saw the big print, I said, man, this is a book that I can enjoy. But if I'm feeling like a little sluggish, I know that I can read a full chapter and it's not going to take me a long period of time. You know what I mean? So depending upon the emotional state of the little one and or the parent, again, this is a book that can be enjoyed in one sitting or paced over time. Muz, as we wind down our time here on the Children's Book Spotlight Series, we always have 2 special ways that we close out the program. First off, we always like to give a little tip of the cap to one of our favorite neighbors, Mr. Rogers, who of course is the beloved host of the long-running children's television program that aired here in the United States for many decades, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He always encouraged little ones, and he did this in different moments and times through his program. Whenever he traveled the country and he spoke at college commencement speeches, most notably so he did this when he received his Lifetime Achievement Award at the Daytime Emmys in 2000, before he passed from stomach cancer. He encouraged all of us to remember those who helped love us into being. And I always get goosebumps when I say that phrase, because that was Mr. Rogers' way of saying, remember those people along your path, whether it be your grandmother, your grandfather, your mom, your dad, your 3rd grade teacher. There were people along your path, no doubt, that inspired you, that encouraged you to never give up, who reminded you, Muz, you have value, you have worth, you're loved and you're special. Who would be some of the people that you would like to publicly recognize here on episode number 149 of the Children's Book Spotlight Series, who helped love you, Muz Murray, into being?
Basically, other children's writers, I would say. Ursula Le Guin, J.R. Tolkien, Kenneth Graham, all those, and my aunt, who read bedtime stories to me every night.
And thank you for sharing those, Muz, because, after getting to know you for a year's time or so now, and seeing the depth of your work in terms of ranging from, talking about spirituality to helping little ones to really enjoy childhood. You're helping many people. You are loving many people into being right now, especially little ones around the world. And this leads us into how we conclude all of our Children's Book Spotlight Series episodes. I feel that all of us, when we're here on earth, we have the ability to help one another bring our dreams, our visions, our goals, our heartfelt desires to life. And we always like to give a little tip of the cap to one of our favorite Disney animated classics that really conceptualizes this perfectly. In 1992, we remember The Genie of the Lamp. We remember the late Robin Williams who voiced the Genie of the Lamp in Disney's Aladdin. So we have a little segment here on the Children's Book Spotlight Series called 3 Wishes. So Muz, for years, for decades, you have given to children, parents, families, educators, to those who love great books, to help people connect with their spirituality. You've given so freely of yourself for a long period of time. So this is your opportunity to receive, Muz. So you are being given 3 wishes on this week's edition of the Children's Book Spotlight Series. What would those 3 wishes be?
I would love feedback from children all over the world. It would warm my heart to know that this book has given them such joy, and I can't think of 2 other wishes at the moment, only that everybody would buy the book and spread it around and tell all their mothers, friends, and friendly mothers and mothers groups and teachers about the story, because I think it brings a lot of heart to the world's children.
Agreed, Muz. And these are truly wholesome stories. They're really delightful stories. And especially, when you go to the internet, when you turn on the television, there's a lot of things that are really not in alignment for children, things that are not appropriate for children. And your stories are so charming. They're very, kids, there's so much within the contents of Old Mother West Wind Tales that children will be able to enjoy. And especially, one of the things that I encourage all parents, all grandparents, especially, who are looking for the perfect book to enjoy with their little ones during the summer reading season. Muz, one of the things that has happened over the past several years is that literacy levels have plummeted as the result of the pandemic. So a lot of children are actually behind on their reading. And I feel that this summer is the summer where we can do our part to bring little ones back up to speed. And Old Mother West Wind Tales is one of the perfect ways to go about doing that. So again, we encourage all of you, our listeners and viewers, our friends and neighbors, and of course, our fellow shining stars. If you haven't had the opportunity to do so yet, you can head on over to Muz's official website, muz-murray.com. You can head on over.
That's if they live in England, because otherwise I'd have to post the book to America, and that would take a long time.
So that's why we're, of course, mentioning Amazon.com. That is your preferred online vehicle of choice. If it is easier for you to head on over to Amazon.com, you can purchase your copy of Old Mother West Wind Tales, courtesy of our neighbors at Inner Garden Publishing. And of course, you can leave a 5-star review, because not only does that help with the algorithms, those happy algorithms, that helps Muz in terms of the search rankings and the criteria for Amazon. But then again, that's a much needed virtual hug, a hug from afar, to remind him that he is doing much needed and wonderful work for children, parents, families, educators, and those who love great children's books. Raise your hand if you have had fun on episode number 149 of the Children's Book Spotlight Series. Muz is raising his hand. I'm raising both of my hands. We see hands being raised with the little ones on screen. So mission accomplished, job well done on episode number 149 of the Children's Book Spotlight Series. There are many more magical trolley stops to come, including our next trolley stop. And we are super excited because one of our dearest friends, our dearest neighbors, who has been with us almost since the very beginning of the Children's Book Spotlight Series, award-winning artist and children's book author, John Masiulionis, is going to be joining us for a special in-studio episode of the Children's Book Spotlight series as we celebrate episode number 150. Of course, John is spending some time here in the San Diego area as part of his North American book tour to celebrate the launch of his brand new children's book, Growing an Artist, the story of a landscaper and his son, published through Simon & Schuster's Kids Division, Simon Kids. So we're already giving you a little bit of a sneak peek as to what you can expect on episode number 150 of the Children's Book Spotlight series. And it has been such a joy to be able to spend these near 4 years with all of you and sharing wonderful books and some of the greatest writers and illustrators in the kidlit community, such as Muz in the process. So again, we just want to thank you for all of your continued support of the Children's Book Spotlight series. If you are a children's author, but before we give the happy happies and the thank yous, if this message has inspired you, the message of Old Mother West Wind Tales, if you are a fan of animals and nature, if you really are now saying, you know what, Muz and John, I now have the perfect book that I can share with my daughter, with my son, with my granddaughter, with my grandson, that they can enjoy time after time, and it can be passed on from generation to generation. We encourage you, if you haven't had the opportunities to do so, to subscribe to PR from the Heart's official YouTube channel and to share this very special trolley stop that has been episode number 149 of the Children's Book Spotlight series. Now, again, if you are a children's author and if you would like to appear on a future edition of the PR from the Heart Children's Book Spotlight series to share your inspiring story, the release of your brand new children's book, just as Muz did here this week, you can head on over to our official website at prfromtheheart.com, or you can connect with us via any of our social media platforms that you now see on screen, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all at PR from the Heart. We also want to give 2 tips of the cap, actually 3 tips of the cap, but the first one, of course, being to one of our favorite neighbors. You remember him and you love him as the beloved Mr. McFeely on the long-running children's television program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. We know him and we love him as David Newell. David joins me each and every month on the PR from the Heart Neighborly Reviews bookcast, where we deliver new heartfelt reviews from the newest children's books, the shining stars in the kidlit community right here at PR from the Heart. And we are excited because David and I will be sharing and reviewing Old Mother West Wind Tales in the July edition of the Neighborly Reviews bookcast. So if you are a children's author and would love for David and I to review your brand new children's book on a forthcoming edition of the Neighborly Reviews bookcast, you know how to connect with us via our official website at prfromtheheart.com or any of our social media platforms at PR from the Heart. One tip of the cap to one of our favorite neighbors here in the San Diego area, Laura Kavanaugh. She is the host and executive producer of San Diego Living, which is the official home of Empowering Reads for Kids. That is the official television book review segment here at PR from the Heart. So if you would like for Laura and I to share your brand new children's book to bring it to life for the children, parents, families, educators, and those who love great children's books in America's finest city, here in San Diego, California, on the CW San Diego CBS 8, you can connect with us via our official website at prfromtheheart.com or any of our social media platforms on screen. And also, one last tip of the cap to some of our favorite neighbors here in the San Diego, California area at Unity Church of El Cajon. Each and every month, we are so excited to share some beautiful brand new children's books, heartfelt children's books, might I add as well, on the Unity of El Cajon Story Time with Mr. John. So if you would like for me to be able to share your brand new children's book on a forthcoming edition of the Unity Church of El Cajon Storytime with Mr. John, you know where to connect with us at prfromtheheart.com or via any of our social media platforms as well. And one last housekeeping note is that if you are a children's author and would like for further support, we would love to be able to see how we can help and support and be of service to you to get out the message of your brand new children's book. If you're interested in facilitating a featured television interview in a city of your choosing, if you would like to facilitate a book or a media tour in a city of your choosing, if you would like more information on our media coaching and mentoring program, you can head on over to prfromtheheart.com, our official website, learn more about all the services that we offer, the shining stars in the kidlit community, and how we can be of service to you. You can schedule your own courtesy discovery call in the process. One final mention, you can head on over to muz-murray.com if you live in the United Kingdom, or you can head on over to amazon.com as well.
No dash.
No dash, muzmurray.com. Alleviate the dash, muzmurray.com, or you can head on over to amazon.com. We've included the links below in the description, by the way, of this episode to make things easier. With being on Amazon, if that's your preferred online vehicle of your choosing, you can leave a 5-star review. Again, that's one of the many ways that you can pledge your support for Muz, to remind him that he is doing much needed and wonderful work for children, parents, families, educators, and those who love great children's books. As we hear the trolley, we know that that's time to go. That's a little reminder that it's time to go. So we want to thank all of you for your continued support here of us at PR from the Heart, and for the Children's Book Spotlight Series, for your continued support of children's authors and illustrators all around the world, such as Muz, who again are doing wonderful and much needed work for children, parents, families, educators, those who love great children's books, for your continued support of local libraries and independent bookstores and children's bookstores, which are really some of the pillars of our community. And above all else, we want to thank you for helping us to walk home the children of the world. One last tip of the cap, of course, a recognition of one of our favorite neighbors, once again, Mr. Rogers. He reminded all of us when he walked this earthly plane, in his own private numerology, he would always use the numbers 143. That was his way of saying, I love you. And he reminded all of us of our worth and our value, as there's one letter in I, 4 letters in love, and 3 letters in you. Well, as a little tip of the cap to Mr. Rogers, because Muz was kind enough to join us here this week on the program, we like to say 243. There are 2 letters in we, 4 letters in love, and 3 letters in you. That is our reminder, our message to you, that we love you. We are reminding you of your inherent worth and your inherent value, and that you are loved, that you are special, that you are whole, that you are healthy, that you are complete, just the way that you are. Just the way that you are right now in this very moment. And of course, again, that there's really no other person in the world just like you. So again, a little bit of a message from Mr. Rogers from up above, and Muz and myself here as we conclude this week's episode of the Children's Book Spotlight Series. So from Muz Murray, for myself, John Masiulionis, this has been episode number 149 of the Children's Book Spotlight Series. We hope you've enjoyed this wonderful trolley stop. We look forward to enjoying our next trolley stop together with award-winning artist and children's book author, John Parr, as we celebrate 150 episodes of the Children's Book Spotlight Series. But for now, once again, thank you for helping us to walk home the children of the world, our fellow friends, our fellow neighbors, and our fellow shining stars. Goodbye for now.